Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Get Set Go Beyond Sports with me, Sonali Gupta. It is always an honor and pleasure to be speaking to people in sports who are achievers, who are amateur, who are professionals, people who've just started out, everything and everyone who's connected to sports. What makes sports so important in their lives is what we really like to bring out and bring to you our stories of sports and its influence in our lives. With us today is our very own Ritvik Bhattacharya. Ritvik is India's number one and has won 9 Professional Squash Association titles. Also, he was the first Indian to win a PSA title. He is also a national junior champion under 19 in 1997 and 98. He is also the first Indian to reach the PSA World Top 50 rankings, with his highest being number 8 in the world. He has won Indian National Squash Championship 5 times. He has set up a squash academy called START, Squash Temple and Real Training, which has trained over 150 tribal children hailing from economically poor backgrounds from villages in and around Mokashi in around Mumbai. The trainees at his academy are now making waves in the junior national circuit. He's trained with Neil Harvey, former world number 12 and UK number 1, who holds the record of having trained 4 world champions. He was awarded with Rajiv Gandhi State Sports Award for Best Sports Person in 2003 and 2004. Ritvik, I'm very sure that I must have still missed something about you.
No, I think you got quite a bit.
It is such an honor to have someone like you. You've been an achiever. You've been at the top of the game. Do tell me, and it's a question that I really usually start the show with, is what made you choose sports and what made you want to continue with sports for the rest of your life now?
I think sports chose me more than me choosing sports. It was my father was in the Air Force, remote places all across the country, but really nice Air Force base places to grow up in. We had a lot of facilities to play sport, but they were quite isolated, and it was always a distinction between playing and studying, and a work and play. And for me, playing was fun and more joy, and work was work. And then I got a choice to maybe make my work a sport, and that sort of appealed to me. And it has its ups and downs, but in principle there's never a dull moment. It's always very rewarding as a choice. And I would like to tell everyone that sports is a major profession internationally, but in India we still maybe besides the cricketers and a few elite sportsmen, the masses and the children aren't really looking at it as a professional, as an occupation. And looking at the amount of talent, this is something which needs to come through. In the next 10-15 years, sports is going to be huge in India. Just looking at our population and everyone moving towards health and nutrition and a better lifestyle. And so it's been, I don't think it was so much as a either or. It was more like, I'm good at this and I get a chance to travel and see the world. And eventually that sort of made me, or it was attractive for me. And then when I started playing and competing with the best players, it was fascinating. It was a brilliant journey, and I would do it all over again.
Wow. So tell me something. Why, Ritvik, you make it sound so easy that, it's about going out there and playing the world and playing the best in the world. I'm very sure that apart from the physical training and having to learn this sport really in its depth, mentally there must have been a lot of challenge for you, especially at the time when you were playing. Squash wasn't as popular back then. probably still has to get its fame as much as it deserves. How did you then actually prepare yourself for your matches, and how did you keep yourself going mentally with all of this?
Squash isn't as popular as it should be even now, I think, and but I mean, there are two sides to every story. I think the fact that it was squash allowed me to truly experience what a playing professionally a sport would mean. I don't think a lot of the other more popular sports, the sportsmen get the privilege of traveling genuinely on your own. You have your entourages with you and coaches, and that can always also be a more pressure and more burden. But for us, it was amazing. I mean, we had a bunch of, say, 50 players who would travel around the world and stay together, play matches, and then go out. If you lost, you would go out and check out the place and party a bit. But mainly it was a brilliant experience, and as a sport, it's very rewarding because you're really challenging yourself and testing yourself, because that big question is there: how good am I, and how good am I as compared to the best player in the world, and can an Indian be the best player in the world? And the pursuit of excellence, as well as the university of life, which we sort of went through when I went to Neil Harvey and trained over there after finishing college in Delhi. um, it was truly rewarding. I mean, I'm so much richer for it. I don't know if it equates equally at the same time to the time and effort put in, but in the long run, it all, I think, evens out, and it's really rewarding.
Right. But so squash is one of the few sports which, in a way, requires very, very less equipment, and yet it is not so famous, and especially at school levels. It's also not a sport where you can say it is one of the expensive sports, let's say, compared to a golf, where the popular notion is that golf is expensive because its kit is so expensive. But there is very little that you do require in terms of squash to get started. And yet, at our grassroots level, especially schools and all, we still do not see as much of squash. So, what do you think can be a reason for that?
I mean, if you look at internationally, they're like a normal university like Harvard or a Princeton will have 50 squash courts. I don't think there are 50 squash courts in most cities. The facilities, not only for squash, for a lot of sports, is very lacking in rural India and outside the cities. And even in the cities, it's very membership oriented. And if you have access, and a lot of kids don't have access to basic facilities in any sport. Squash is not the cheapest sport because your wear and tear is a lot. Your shoes, your rackets, your strings, the ball, and everyone doesn't have access to the courts and the clubs, which the armed forces allowed me to use. And then I got better. I could go pretty much to any club. So um, it is got a long way to go, I think, in terms of, I mean, first India has to become a sporting nation. Then a lot of other sports should get a lot more support from all walks, and including corporates and people and sponsors, because that's what's happening everywhere else. In India, it's more like first we need to survive, and then we look at other things like sports and things like
Right,
that. So
right,
the importance is not given yet, which is a shame, because for a person, for a child to be fully rounded, the physical part is important. And with
right,
squash, we have the army, which has a lot of courts, and then we have some cities which have a lot of courts, but otherwise
right,
it's pretty exclusive. And that's a shame, because I mean, after seeing what we're doing over here with the academy, the Start Academy and the tribal village, these kids are as good as anyone else in the world. And
right,
which means a lot of India is very good in squash and other sports like squash, and they just
right.
don't get to see or check if their talent is good enough to be the best.
Right. So for you, it's been a journey from, say, being taught by one of the finest in the world to teaching many children per year. What made you start your academy? Is this these little gaps that you saw visibly when you were in your playing career that you thought were missing and that made you want to start your own?
So I think there's a gap between what happens in India and the level of coaching and availability as well as the information in over here. And so when I decided to play professionally, I went for a couple of tournaments and I asked around and I heard that there are many great clubs and academies going on in America and in England as well. But Neil was training the world champion, and I got a chance to go there for 3 weeks because that's what I could afford at that time. And it was phenomenal. And there was another level of professionalism. It was genuinely a profession over there, where you would sleep, and in India you're training at 6 in the morning and in the evening and fighting for courts. Over there the professional players had the courts, and you would get to the club at 9, play at 10, like you go to work, finish by 12:30, and then back again at 2:33 after lunch, and then in the evening gym. And so I mean it was a whole day you were pretty much training, and I think that's what got me to think about. In India, a lot of kids are going abroad. We go to Egypt, we go to England and train over there, but we're not prepared to get as much information and knowledge and improve as much as the kids and the club gets when we go over there. So everyone figures out the Indian players' games, and we don't get as much information because we're not prepared. And I thought about a place, and then I did some work with the Indian players, some of the Indian junior players, Indian team junior players in Bombay, and I found that there's not enough time being given to the kids to train, or they don't have enough time. They have maximum have a couple of hours, and I wanted a place where you could train the whole day, and if a kid really wanted to, they could train at night as well. And that was the beginning of it. And then I thought about it, that if a 12-year-old Ritwik was there, what would he want? What was missing for him, and could we give it to so many kids who are better than that 12-year-old Ritwik was? And I like to say I've come a long way.
What was the difference between the 12-year-old Ritwik and what you are providing now to these kids?
I was really lucky. I had a boarding school where there was a squash court, and there was a sort of legacy where there were ex-champions from that school, the Rashtriya Indian Military College in Dehradun. And so there was Brigadier Manchanda, there was Arjun Singh. I mean, he wasn't from my school, but he was from the army. And I got to play and train with the armed forces players and, get my level up, my fitness up. So that was a unique case. But the basic thing missing is that the access is not there, the time is not there. And if those two things are there, the best coaching is not provided. We are not really helping the kids understand what it is. And more importantly, most of our kids are dreaming of being, say, number one in India when they're 10 and 11 and 12. And unfortunately, even then and even now, there's no number one in India who is number one in the world. So when I became number one in India, the number one Indian player, Arjun, was in the top 75, top 100 in the world. And so then by the time I was 17, 18, I had to reset my dream and say, now I want to be number one in the world. And I think the effort required at 12 to be number one in the world and number one in India is pretty much the same. As the dream has to be set and has to be kept with the coaches and the team around you and the environment, where it's not like a lot of people, I think, are embarrassed to even say, I'd like to be number one in India. Or an Indian boy would say, or a girl would say, I want to be number one in the world. They'll be embarrassed to say it. Whereas that has to change in our mentality, that we are better and we can be better than anyone else if the right environment is there, and the talent is definitely there. And whatever I've seen in the last 10 years.
Tell me, sorry,
there's a huge amount of talent.
Yeah, so I want to just sort of pop in this little question here while you're talking about the difference between a 12 and a 17, 18. Do you really think that because we are such an education-oriented society, and because obviously so many of the people that are coming are not from the privileged space of having to afford their sports as a career, that gap between the 12 and the 17 when they are graduating from, say, a junior school to high school, the pressure on having to take up something as a career, especially which is more rewarding, is playing on their mind?
For sure. Meaning like you said, the pressure on the education is so much, and success is associated with doing well in studies more than in anything else. That I mean, that age-old thing of पढ़ाई कम, I mean, खेलो मत और पढ़ाई करने चले जाओ, stop studying, I mean, stop playing and go and study.
Yeah,
That's still
yeah,
carrying on large amount with the parents, and but today I think there is a change. In the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a change, and a lot more parents are more open to kids playing professionally, and seeing that they have a better future in some in sports, which, because this large amount of kids who are doing and vying for the same number of spots in the education system is makes it really tough for an average kid or a above average kid to do well and achieve his dream. We definitely need to look at different streams, look at different vocations and upskilling through sport, where we can look at other areas. It doesn't have to be the kid has to be a champion. He can be an administrator, a manager, a coach, a
right,
nutritionist, a physiotherapist, any of the arms of professional sports, and support a national team. Or today there are so many football teams which need help, and
right.
so you can do a sports management degree and work with sports and the business of sports. So there is a small change, I'd say, but I think there's a huge way to go, because I mean, I remember in England when I went there the first year, I was just doing some coaching in the weekends and things like that to make ends meet, and I had a couple of sponsors as well. But by the second year, I was good enough to play in the league system, and then there's a crazy league system over there where every county has a league, every club has a league. People have booked out courts for 6 months in advance. Every Tuesday match was nationally. Tuesday was a national league. On Wednesday was a Surrey league. Then on Friday, Saturdays would be a German league. There was a Dutch league. There was a Swiss league. So and each of these matches would give you £300, £500, £1,000 for a weekend and things like that, which would which is not available in India. There is no leagues. Even if the leagues are there, there's I mean, even the national tournaments are just about have enough sponsors to keep the professional Indian players
Right.
sustain themselves, but that's and we need to be raising the prize money, having bigger tournaments, having more international tournaments, and making a really interesting environment, which is when the leagues also in the community kicks in. So it's a long way to go. We are making the there's the right direction, but unfortunately too little, I think, at the moment.
Right, right. So, do you think that these few steps at grassroots level which actually can help us make sports a more important part of our culture? Not only, let's say, of course, squash, but also other sports where at grassroots levels, like you say, that there is still so much that is not not done or not available.
Yeah, I think more than that is that we are trying to develop as a nation, and we are. I think even the government and a lot of the ministries, the sports ministry, is trying to look at it, but they're not looking at sports to bring about a change. They're looking at better civic stands, better nutrition, trying to clean the villages up, trying to get better education, get more literacy. But I think if we have small centers, community centers, which have some sport in it, whatever the local people enjoy watching, playing. Like I know in Jharkhand, there's a lot more hockey. There's more archery in Orissa. So they can be centers. It doesn't have to be squash. Uh, I
Right.
believe a lot in boxing as well. So we have joined the boxing academy close to the squash academy. Now we're going to have a football academy there as well. So a kid needs to get a good balance of all sport. Cannot be at a young age that he's just playing one sport or she's just playing one sport. And they need to immerse. They need to have some team sports in them, so they learn how to communicate. The social interaction and education through sport is being detailed. Very it's super for kids, and we are not giving enough importance to it. I think our schools need to adjust themselves to being more conducive to kids who are playing on the national circuit, to give them more leeway and support them rather than punishing them because they have to go and play tournaments and things like that, which I'm hearing. So
Yeah.
it is a overall change in the mindset which has to come through, which will come through, because these kids who are being forgotten, whose talent is being not being maximized, will become parents, and it's happened for the last 20, 30
Right.
years where the best talent has gone away in sport, and gone off to America to
Yes.
study and then played from there and things like that. So
Right.
in a few years, I think 5 to 10 years, it'll change.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about how you have sort of modeled this academy, and what are the kind of kids that are coming in, and what really has been happening in out there with them?
So when I got the land, I saw that this land was touching this tribal village, the Thakurwadi tribal village, which is of the Nirguda tribe. So, which was interesting because no one really wanted this land initially, and it was touching a lake, and on the other side there was this village. And so today, after sitting at the land and watching the thing for maybe a couple of years, I didn't make much over there. Is to come down from Bombay and spend time here. We got a football coach down. First, they had to trust me because I'm this outsider who's suddenly trying to come and make kids play football, or say we're going to do something. And then slowly the whole shape formed, and I got some help from people who'd been here for 15, 20 years. Munish Makhija, Sridhar, a couple of other guys over here to give me a lay of the land, because if I was doing this on my own, it'd be really difficult. And I have a good team of people in the valley over here, and our dream is to make it a sports village, and use sport to develop. And the only advice I can say is that you have to sit and wait and watch and be very patient and not expect change every day, but know you're putting the right ingredients in. And
Right.
then the other thing which we did was that I mean, because of my army or my Air Force background, we reached out to NDA, we reached out to the Rashtriya Military College, we got the Navy team, we got the Air Force team, we got the best players in the country who were training with me in Bombay. They started coming in over here. So the exposure, and it was a cauldron of like talent from and different people from different places coming and training together, being friends. A lot of tournaments now are just parents going there and it being a very pressure affair, which was not the same in our time. So where do the kids really enjoy the sport? It's when camps like this where they come here, they let their hair down, no parents running around, they make friends with the all kinds of people, and improvement happens as well in their squash because you're immersing in it, you're immersing fully in it. You're doing 10, 12 hours of training relentlessly, and in a week what they do is tough to do that in a city in a month, maybe 2 months.
Right. Right. Tell me something. You very briefly mentioned this whole parental angle, and is this now this new wave of parents the ones who want to make their kids overachievers, the ones who know so much about everything? Everything is kind of available on a Google. And do you think now it is in fact sort of, it has this contradictory you know what can I say? On the kids in a way that there is now more pressure. It's difficult to keep the parents away from being involved in this child's every moment and everyday activity.
I mean, I read this article about 3 months back that the 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old kids in Pune were outperforming in the last 3 to 6 months because the parents were not able to come and see the practice. You know, there are a lot of examples. I'm not generalizing. There's some amazing parents,
Yes.
and a lot of the champions. I mean, I know like a lot of our Indian superstars in sport. Their parents have been actually very, very good. And a lot of the helicopter parents, their kids haven't done well. So if helicopter parenting was working, then I would say everyone should do it. But there are only very
Right.
few stories like of Agassi whose father was really hard on him. And if you read his autobiography, and back in the day, there were some really dominating parents. Today, there are a lot of dominating parents who are trying to get there because they see the opportunity which they missed, and there's a lot more opportunity if you do well or you excel in anything today to shine and to have a better future. So the parents, because they couldn't do it, are trying to relive that and tell their kids that there's an opportunity here. But I think the kids are not ready, or they've got so much opportunity that they don't know how to make a choice. And
Right.
that's where there's a little bit of a breakdown, because for the kid to choose, he needs to come and meet someone like me and say, okay, this guy played squash and he's not done too badly, so I want to follow this, and that's enough
Right.
for a kid, you know. So exposure is good, going to tournaments is good, but what's happened is that it's because the spaces in which everyone's together staying and, you know, in tournaments, in training, I'm seeing more and more parents interfering and not and doing the job of the coach, the parent, the teacher, and everything else, you know. And because there's been no good coaches and teachers around, they have had to do it. But when there is a good coach, then they're not able to switch back and stop. But
Right.
when it's explained to them, it happens as well, you know. So a lot of parents have toned it down who work with me, and, you know, it's been a joy for them because they can sit back and not stress in a match, and, you know, sit back and have a coffee and have a laugh. And they have to some of them have to train at doing that, because I tell them, you know, if you're really going to be like this, you see a video of yourself, put a video, make your son or daughter play a match and observe your own expressions, and then you know what the other person's feeling, because your kids are connected to you. Even if you do a like that, the kids are
Yes.
hearing it, you know, even the other side of the glass, and with 20
Yes.
people sitting there or 100 people sitting there.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you've like sort of touched this a very, very vital point, that this is where mental training and this mental coaching and a lot of sports psychologists are in fact now stepping in. How do you train and how do you sort of help the kids do this kind of, have the approach of being sort of, spaced out when you're playing? So, all the like the bigger players have always mentioned that, we are only in our zone, we are only on the court, and we sort of don't know what's happening outside of it. That's the time I'm able to perform my best. So how can you and how do you sort of bring kids to get into that zone?
So I created my own team. I had a very close friend, Raj, who was to, you know, help me on the mental side of things as well. But I remember meeting. He also at Bombay Gym made me meet Geet Sethi, one of our
Yes,
billiards world
brilliant.
champions. And I remember Geet telling me, because I was at, I think it was 21, maybe 22 years old, and the phones and all were all there around, and we would be spending not as much time as the kids do today, but we were spending a lot of time. And I remember him telling me that during a tournament, he would switch his phone off, have a landline in his hotel room, and tell his wife and kids that I'm available here if there's any emergency, but I'm not available on my phone is off, you know. And then I look back, and then today I'm seeing these tribal kids train in the morning today. And I think I was successful because I had less noise in my head and I had less distractions compared to all the kids I was playing with at my time, you know, in the juniors, in the pro circuit. When I started playing internationally, a lot of kids were on the same level, a lot of the players were on the same level with, so it changed. But these tribal kids have zero distraction in their head. You know, there's no phone, there's no I have to go home, there's no I'm hungry. When they're on the court, it's truly a joy for them and they're fully immersed. So 100% of a kid who's playing with little less skill is better than 70% of a kid who's half his mind, or 30% or 40% or 50% his mind is somewhere else. You know, so then you only have 50% of that really good kid or player, and as opposed to 100% of one player who's fully there and he's seeing your expressions. And that's why I like boxing, because in boxing you can't zone out, you know. And you mentioned that how does a kid get in the zone? The kid gets in the zone when he trains in the zone, when his preparation is in the zone, even in his training days. So, you know, when he's at the club, no one is watching, and his intensity is the same as when it would be in a match. That's when you get in the zone there. So I know, I mean, I've been going around, but the main point is that you need
Yeah.
to really
Yeah.
immerse into the
But
game and, you
I'm
know,
going
have
to
no
ask
distractions.
you, I'm going to ask you a question on this, Ritwik, is that then when you're training the kids, like you mentioned, to sort of have zero distractions, be on the court when you're training and when you're on the court, how do they then deal with, say, the pressure of being in the spotlight when they're playing? So, when you go to a tournament and then you have so much audience and you have so much,
Yeah.
so many people watching you, not only just your parents or your coach who's in your vicinity, but then you also are aware of just that many, people watching you. And then that's the pressure to perform, also the pressure to sort of play your league, to get your points, keep going up. How do they then, and how did you then sort of do these things?
Well, I mean, when I say distracted, a lot of players will be looking out of the court to see who's sitting over there, who's the what the referee is saying, talking to the referee, listening to their coaches or their parents' advice as well as their hand actions. But that means 50% or maybe more of that kid's brain or player's brain is outside the court. Now, if I can train myself to not look out of the court, to be with my own thoughts, with my own breathing, to keep observing my space on the court and where the kid is. So it's actually just conditioning, anchoring, and training a kid rather than. And you even mentioned about mental training and a lot more coaches and all. That's, I think, at a later level. In the initial level, it's about really staying in the moment and teaching the kid how to stay in the moment, which is much easier outside the city. Which is why I'm over here. The kids are in the moment. There's nothing else. There's nothing else distracting them. So in
Right.
the city, it's that much more tougher to stay in the moment and think of each shot and think
Right.
about each. But like my coach used to give me an example that a mountaineer can't make one mistake. A pilot cannot make a mistake. One slip and that's the end. So they're in the moment way more, and you should play a match of squash or anything else with the same intensity. And to really train that, you have to walk the talk. And when you're eating breakfast, eat breakfast. When you're on the phone, be on the phone. When you're sleeping, you should be on sleeping. And you have to train yourself to do that, just like any other skill. And it's a process of a few months of doing that. I mean, the theory is 21 days of doing it and then it becomes yours, but sometimes it can
Right.
take longer, but you have to be
Yeah.
focused. And once you have that and once you're keen and focused, then every skill can be learned. So it doesn't, then it's not about your drop or your fitness or anything else. It's about working that hard and making your weaknesses go away and making your strengths better. So
Right.
based on all this, then when you're in that moment when lots of things are going on, two things happen. Either you are doing it better and the other guy is more distracted than you, or you dig in and imagine or visualize that situation earlier because you've seen it, it's the finals, many people are there. So you visualize it many, many, many times so that when you walk on court, it almost feels like deja vu, like it's already been done. And then you play well as well.
Right. And it's sort of every single sports player and every single person and every single player that I have had from across sports have emphasized so much on the importance of visualization. It just
Yeah.
seems like it is such an important part of becoming a sports player that it's almost never really talked about. Like, the people will look at the equipment and the people will look at what you're wearing and what you're
Yeah.
playing, but the effort and the training you have done via your visualization is something that is just so still so nascent in a way that people don't even know about it. So
It is secretive. It is
can
a bit
you give?
secretive.
Yeah, sorry.
I said it is a bit secretive. Some
Yeah.
people do it naturally, so they can't explain it. Some of the champions I know, they only think like that, so they're visualizing all the time. Um, Having a good imagination helps. So kids who have done a lot of reading as opposed to watching movies is have a better imagination and are able to visualize better because they are reading and visualizing all the time the story. So again, it's a very important skill. It's something which is an edge and can needs to be really focused and worked on with the kid, because once the kids who have an edge, who have it naturally, like I know Rami has it naturally. Rami Ashore would visualize a lot. I think Saurav visualizes a lot. I would visualize a lot, but I would also enhance my visualization by squash is a lot about visualization, your movement work. And because it's you're shot from different angles on a glass court, you start learning to see yourself from sitting outside. And I could sit in bed and visualize myself playing, doing a solo session. I could see myself from all angles. I could do a slow motion and see how I'm hitting that shot and what's going wrong with the swing or with the movement or something I'm overlooking, and then correct it and then go back to the court and check it out as well physically.
Right.
So, but I remember when I was 16, I was helping out at the Mahindra and Mahindra International. I was helping the world number two carrying his bags, and I was Rodney Isles, and he was a unique guy, man. He all the other players who were there would go morning, evening to practice before the matches and all. He just went once on the first day he landed. He went and saw the court, hit for 20 minutes max on his own, came back and he didn't leave the hotel room till his match. No morning training, nothing. And so I observed this. I was like, man, I have less work, but what is this guy up to and how is he managing? So he would not talk to me till after the match. And if he had won his match, then he would talk to me on the taxi ride back from the CCI to the President Hotel. And so I would wait and keep my questions. And one of the questions was that, how come, what's up with you? Why aren't you going in training? And he's like, I've done a lot of training. I just see the bounce and I visualize it, and then I can sit in my room and do my practice. And I was like, man, that's cool. So I've always, from 16, I took that information and, that exposure and his insight. And I try to do it always, you should go and visualize the court, the bounce, see the different conditions. Even in squash, like tennis, there are different services of hot and cold. If it's a hot place, it's a different game. And if it's a cold place, it's a very different sport. So visualization helps, and then today it's even easier because all the matches are there. Every kid, even on the junior circuit, has all his opponents' matches which are recorded. So he can just go type a kid's name saying, I'm playing this guy, and see the recording. But bizarrely enough, not many kids do it. They don't really go and see it, and they like turn up a little unprepared. And if the other opponent has done it, then they have an advantage,
Right.
But for that, you need time and you need space. And to do it in the city, in a club, it's not easy because everyone's got things to do, which is why it works in an academy here, And less kids is good because if you have 20 kids, you can give them that much less time, No one is really giving each kid his best.
Absolutely. So tell me something. So with all of this conversation and everything that we have spoken, what is your opinion on squash still not being added to the Olympics?
It's a really interesting question. It's sad. I think the Olympics is missing out on a really good community as well as a really something which would add value to the Olympics. Because even I'm seeing a lot of sports coming in, including break dancing and all. And I don't know if the original people who thought about the Olympics thought that break dance would be in it one day, I don't know if they had been told about squash. I think they would have chosen it but squash itself as a community, with my time with the PSA as well, and I know what the WSF and PSA and how hard they've been working, has had to rebrand itself, make it more popular, really grow in different countries. I think we are in some 180 countries now. It is definitely good. We are still looking to see if the Olympics will allow us in, rather than being so good and so big that the Olympics has no choice, And I think that's after the 5th time we were told no, I think pretty much my whole career, and then 10 years after that as well. I think our people in charge in squash on the WSF and PSA are thinking more like that. We need to raise the prize money in tournaments. We need to have tournaments which the winner gets $1 million. Then it's going to be tough, and the community will become bigger. There'll be more people on the world tour. So there's things both ways. I also have had thoughts about, which a lot of people laughed at, that squash is played in winter countries, and most of the time, most of the tour is in winter. So we should go to the Winter Olympics. I was telling someone that recently, and they were like, the Winter Olympics will never have squash because it has to be on snow or ice.
Right.
So we're stuck in between two different mindsets and two Olympics, and it's been a while, and it's sad because I know I was working with a kid who was like, there was a big buzz, and he's like, 2024, I'll be perfectly at the same age when the Olympics will come in, and then we're told that no, there's no Olympics. So I don't know if 2028 will come in or 2032, but it should come in soon. It'll be good for squash.
Right. Okay, so we're now, Ritvik, I think we've had a lot of serious conversations. So I'm going to ask you a few true and false questions, and you're going to have to tell me this, okay? So Forbes magazine once voted squash as the healthiest sport.
True.
Um, there is only one type of squash variant.
There's only one type of
Squash variant.
squash variant.
As in, there is only one type of a squash game that you play.
No, there are more than one types. Yeah, there are more
Right.
than one type.
Okay, squash was first played in England.
Yes, in the prisons. Then they
Squash
went to Harrow.
Squash is one of the best cardiovascular activities.
Yes.
Okay,
True.
squash was derived from tennis as a game.
Yes. Initially, yes, but actually, it's a really funny story. It was derived in the prison where there was no tennis. There was tennis rackets and a wall in the dungeons, and they would hit the ball against it. That's where it originally came up. But I
Right,
think they used tennis rackets and a tennis ball initially.
right,
Even I
which is
did
why,
actually. I used to play so much tennis, and only when it used to rain, I used to go into the tennis squash court when I was 7, 8 years old and play with the tennis racket and ball in the squash court.
yeah. So yes, so that's thank you so much for some serious conversations, for some serious insights, and for some fun with us or on this episode today. Thank you so much, Ritvik, once again for being with Go Beyond Sports, for enlightening us, and for bringing sports so close to the villages and to the tribal. So we really wish you all the best for that.
Thank you, Shinali. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for watching Go Beyond Sports. Thank you for watching me and Ritvik in conversation today. Do like, subscribe, and continue to support us across all media channels. Thank you once again, and hope to see you soon.